I'm Anthony Wright, and I'm your co-host today on the Living Conversation with,
Adam Dietz.
and we're here with our guest, Lee Carlson, who is a Zen practitioner, a student of Peter Mathiasen, who was a student or a Dharma heir of Maizumi Roshi. And before the break, Peter, you were talking about going to teach at a private school about Zen mindfulness and about how the private school was sort of in an uproar because they banned cell phones. But, that brought me back to this idea about the Four Noble Truths, that there is suffering, but there's also an end to suffering. And, um, one of the breakthroughs that I had uh, after an intense period of some suffering was to go, wait, there's the koan of the mosquito biting the iron bowl. And the mosquito has to bite, and the iron bowl can't be bitten. And Alan Watts was talking about desire. And the problem is that when we desire something, we separate ourselves from it. And I went, oh, and the problem is that there's really no separation. And that I had a breakthrough similar to yours. And I went, oh, there's no separated Anthony. There is no Anthony. Huh. There's just what's happening here now, and then what's happening with Peter and what's happening with Adam. Um, and again, another breakthrough point that can come anytime for any of us. I don't know if you remember about the story about the monk that was walking along a path and he kicked a stone and the stone hit the fence, and the sound of the stone hitting the fence, he cracked open about that. So how do we prepare for that opening?
So I love that story, and it's interesting. It comes in a number of different versions. In some
Yeah.
versions, he has that opening when he kicks the stone and he gets the pain in his toe. So,
Oh, right. Okay.
and some stories it's when the stone hits the fence post, and I love that. So how do we prepare? So it depends. I always say to people, it's like learn to play the piano, right? There's so many different reasons to learn to play the piano. You can learn to play the piano just because you want to play a few songs at parties, or that you just want to sort of play for yourself. You can learn to play the piano because you want to be, then you can take the next step because you want to be part of a band. And then if you want to go all the way, you could want to be a great concert pianist. And being a spiritual seeker or Zen person, whatever you want to call it, to me, it's all okay. Like all those choices are okay, right? Like there's nothing wrong with being just learning a few songs to play at parties. If that's what you want, and that's great. That's not any better or worse than being a, famous concert pianist. And I think with Zen, it's the same way. For myself, I have thrown myself into it in very intense ways. I'm at the one end of the spectrum. I'm not claiming to be, the concert pianist of Zen, but I've studied really hard and very long and spent countless tens of thousands of hours in silent meditation and studied with some great teachers. And
Shikantaza.
yeah, so there's that. But at the same time, my book has appealed to a lot of people who aren't even Zen practitioners who they read it and they love it. And so, that's the other end of the spectrum. So how do you prepare yourself? Well, you could prepare yourself like me and sit on a black cushion for tens of thousands of hours and meet with amazing teachers. Or you could prepare yourself by reading a book and thinking about it. Or, there's a local Zen group. I'm in Buffalo, New York right now, and there's a local Zen group that meets once a week, Tuesday nights. That's all they meet. I mean, when I was at Peter, I would sit I'd sit several times a week with him and then on my own at home. But, this group, most of them once a week is fine, and that's good. And that will still, and then some of them also sit at home, but that will literally change the physical structure of your brain. It will create, so as a traumatic brain injury survivor, I am more well versed than most people about what they call neuroplasticity and the ability of the brain to change and to reform itself. And so I always say, people say, what is Zen? I say it's a training method. It's really a training method to train your brain to be a little more compassionate, a little more mindful, and you can take it as far as you want. It's the opposite of going into the army and being trained to shoot guns and, fight with people. And, that's a different kind of training. It's a training. So how do you prepare yourself? You can find a local meditation group. You can read books. You can go on YouTube. There's plenty of people, teaching on YouTube. But at the end of the day, I do think it is important to get with a group of people and with a teacher at some point because you really are going to feel things and see things and a teacher is going to see things in you that a teacher is not going to see through a camera over the internet, and they're going to make suggestions to you. And okay, this is, think about this now, or here's this mantra that you should use, or you should whatever. So I think that there's a lot of things you can do.
So, Adam, and you had in I remember you talking to me about this when you were early on in college. You had an open with a philosophy teacher.
Yeah, as you were speaking, Lee, I was very curious. I do want to circle back on how your practice helped your healing process. That sounds very
Oh,
interesting
good.
to me.
Yes.
But in this regard of the spiritual journey, I think is one of the most fascinating things of all our guests that we have. Two themes come up over and over: healing and spiritual journey. The spiritual journey for me, I think, as you're talking about preparing, first is you make a choice. Like you're tired of this pattern, you want to try something new. So, when I was 16, I tell this story. I went to go to the library and start researching Buddhism out of the blue because I was tired of my patterns of puppy love that I was in. Um, then it was really interesting though because then teachers started to appear, and I think your point about having a teacher is just invaluable. And it's like when the pupil is ready, the teacher appears, kind of saying. And then I think when someone not to get into a guru worship type of thing, but I think all three of us had an experience where a teacher was just so profound for us.
Yeah.
And there's just nothing that could replace that. And so I think I want to encourage people that when you find a teacher that you really resonate with, it's almost like put a lot of stuff to the side, dive right into that, really embrace that. And if I think that's one of the best ways you can make a lot of progress is the point. But going back to your healing journey, um, I just find it so fascinating. I assume you were already into Zen Buddhism before you had your accident.
Yes.
So then after you had your accident, I want to know more about, and I'm so sorry that happened, by the way, but I want to know more about what the process was of your meditation and your healing process. And I know my brother-in-law had TBI, and they said the first year or so is where all this progress is made. My father had a stroke; it was a similar thing. So I want to ask you, could you really give us behind the scenes inside baseball about how that meditation went for you and how you helped yourself heal?
Sure. So, you're right. I first stumbled across being interested in Buddhism and Zen in college. I had a really wonderful teacher, a comparative religion teacher. I read The Snow Leopard by Peter Matson.
Love
It
it.
had just come out like, a couple of years before, and the whole story of how I read it is in the book. It was this amazing sort of coincidence. But it was between my junior and senior years in college, and so I went back to school and I enrolled, and I'd never had any religious interest really, but after reading The Snow Leopard, I was like, wow, this is really cool, this whole Buddhism stuff. So I enrolled in this comparative religions course taught by a wonderful teacher, Dr. Joel Smith, and he and I are still friends. We're still in touch. He's retired, but anyway, so that started me down the path when I'm in my, 21 years old. But I'm still too young. I'm still like, into girls and sports and drugs and whatever. Um, so anyway, so I get married, and my wife, I started to get more interested. And when you're in New York City, there's some really amazing teachers there, and but my wife was a Reformed Catholic, and she wanted nothing. She thought anything having to do with any kind of religion, she wanted, so I sort of put it on a back shelf. And so when we started having problems in our marriage, um, I remembered reading in The Snow Leopard that Peter Matheson lived kind of near where I was living at the time, out on Eastern Long Island. And the internet was just coming online, and I Googled, I found his address, and I sent him a letter saying, "Hey, I could use some, some grounding. I need something right now. And I hear you have students. Are you taking new students?" And he said, "Yeah, come on over." And that started a really wonderful, 15 years with him. And it was about, so I'd been studying with him for about 2 years when I had my accident. And my accident was, for those who don't know or read the book, it's I was hit by a car, but I was a pedestrian. And when I was hit by the car, I like to view it as like a old Wile E. Coyote Roadrunner cartoon where I went flying through the air and came down on my head, and there's like circles and stars, and flying around my head. But the reality was I had a traumatic brain injury. There was cerebrospinal fluid coming out from the crack in my head on the sidewalk, and I was unconscious. And so I got taken to a neurological ICU, and after being there for a little bit, they let me out. They said, you can't go home because you just can't. You can't handle that atmosphere. It would be terrible for your recovery. Where are you going to go? So I went to Florida, where my father lived, and I lived with him while I went to rehab. And you're right, the first year is like key. But there's, everybody thinks Zen is so serious, and it is, but you have to find the humor in this stuff too. So I I get to Florida, and I have my first meeting with my new neurologist, and I'm very sheepishly, I go, he's telling me what I tested out and what happened to me and all this stuff and all this jargon, and I kind of go, um, excuse me, Mr. Neurologist, I have this thing I do. I try to stop my brain from thinking. I try to like stop all thought. And that sounds like that's not really good for my recovery, like, because you're gonna have to retrain me to rethink again, literally. Like, and and he started laughing. He's like, no, no, no. He goes, actually, and he was a young guy. Thank God he was up on all the latest literature. And he said, no, all the literature show that that is really good for your recovery. Meditation will be really wonderful. I want you to keep doing it. Don't stop. Like, it will help your brain heal. And then he said something really interesting, which I love. This is another funny part. He's like, yeah. He goes, you might end up being like the Stevie Wonder of Zen students. He said, that just because
right.
you've injured certain parts of your brain, other parts of your brain, like your spiritual side will get stronger to compensate, and you might have all sorts of great things. And I just laughed. I thought that was really wonderful. So, not to get into the neurological weeds of what happens, but with neuroplasticity, there's a number of things that can happen. Like literally, there is a part of my brain that is dead. You can still see it. Like I have a new neurologist, and he looked at my recent brain scans, and he was like, "Oh my God!" And I said, "No, no, that's been there. Like that's
Yeah.
okay," because other parts of the brain, kind of take over. But also when you sit every day and you meditate and you're calm and you really develop focus and presence and mindfulness and all those things, you're developing those parts of your brain that can do that, and you're making them stronger. Just like, if you want to do bicep curls to make your arms stronger, I mean, you're doing something to make the part of your brain stronger, which is you're developing that mindfulness part. And, they've done studies, they see that it literally can change the structure of your brain at a microscopic and a macroscopic level. So
Yeah. Well, we have to take a short break. I'm Anthony Wright, and I am your co-host
Adam Dietz.
and we're talking with our guest, Lee Carlson. And how can people contact you, Lee?
So my website is the best way. It's leecarlson.life, not .com, but leecarlson.life, because that's what we're talking about here. And I want to say one more thing about my website, if people go there, because we were just talking about the importance of teachers and finding a good teacher. One of those little boxes will pop up asking for your email if you want. You don't have to. But if you want to enter your email, you will get sent to you a 25-page guide to finding a good teacher. And it covers everything. And it comes from a chapter in my book because a friend of mine who's a Tai Chi master read my book, and he read that part of the book and he goes, "Oh my God, I wish I could give this to my students. So many people ask me, how do I find a good teacher?" And I'm like, well, then let's take it out of the book and let's give it away free to people. And so that's something that you can get if you go there. So
Great. All right, we'll take a short break and be right back. So stay tuned. I'm Anthony Wright, and I am your co-host today with
Adam Dietz, welcome back.
and we're talking with our guest, Lee Carlson. And Lee, you were talking about your traumatic brain injury, and so you found that sitting on the black cushion had helped with
Yes.
the rehabilitation. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, because it seems like you made such an amazing recovery from such a traumatic event.
Well, that's why I wrote my first book, because the neurologist said to me, He said, "You're really lucky." He said, "You, one of the few people that went to the edge and came back." He said, "A little bit more and you would have been in a wheelchair drooling for life." He
Oh,
said, "A little bit less, you would have had a concussion and a back concussion, but it wouldn't have been, what you had." And he said, "The fact that you have recovered so well and the fact that you're a writer." So now a lot of people know about
oh, yeah.
TBI. This was before
Right.
the NFL and before, all that stuff. And so
PT.
TBI wasn't known as well. So he said you could really help a lot of people by writing a book about it. And he said also that would help your recovery because it will get your writing again. And so I was very fortunate that I had a really good set of doctors. Not everybody gets that. I had good insurance, and I had a neurologist and a neuropsychologist and a physical therapist and a brain therapist. I had, and it was really great. So I'm sure they helped some. But I also am sure that my Zen practice and my meditating every day and meeting with teachers. I ended up having a different teacher because I wasn't in Long Island where Peter was, so I found another really wonderful teacher in Florida where I was he had lived at Plum Village. He'd been given
Mhm.
transmission by Thich Nhat Hanh, but
Oh,
he was an American. He's like from Rochester, New York. So having people like that to encourage you and to support you and tell you that everything's going to be okay and to, help you with your practice, that was very, very important at the same time.
it strikes me that particularly now in this time of real difficulty, when there is a lot of trauma going around in our everyday life and social life and national life, um, what do we do? And I'm very grateful to be talking with you and doing this work with Adam. It seems like it's we're the ones that are offering assistance in this way. Um, and it came to me that you didn't know this before the interview, but when you were talking about playing the piano, I've been a piano technician for 55 years, and the piano god has taught me so much about the nature of the universe and about how resonance works and about actually how to go into a flow state. And I think that people go into a flow state part of the time every day. And in Chinese philosophy, and I think in Zen too, there's this idea about forgetting the self.
Yes.
And talk to us about what your experiences are about forgetting the self in Zen. And I bet this happens when you're sailing.
You see the idea of a flow state, well, not the idea, I mean, it's a certainty. It's not just an idea, it's a real thing.
Yep.
Is yes, you see it in musicians, you see it in athletes. You see it in average people like us who are playing music or playing tennis or whatever. And yes, people feel it. And then you see it in spiritual seekers and practitioners when you're sitting on your cushion. There are many different ways that it manifests itself. And it's when it happens, and when it happens in a spiritual sense, and when you have an opening that where you literally the self drops away, it's an amazing thing. But what happens when the self drops away? There's sort of this misconception. There's a lot of emphasis on emptiness, and people think emptiness is emptiness. I say no, it's not. It's fullness. It's like,
Right.
when the self drops away, what is there? And what is there is you become so aware of your place in the universe and your connection to other people and this incredible love that underlies all things. And, you talk about resonance, from a piano, same thing. It's like that resonance that's one of my favorite sort of visual aids is Indra's jeweled net.
Oh, yeah.
And it were all these nodes, were all these little nodes in this net, and that the vibrations are traveling along all the lines that connect all of us, and that we're all connected in vibrations in the universe. And I love that. And I always say too, like I'm a conservative guy, believe it or not. Like I was raised in a conservative household. My dad was a businessman. My mother was a homemaker. I'm not like, Age of Aquarius, like woo-woo person, but which is what makes it all the more, I'm very skeptical. And the fact that I've learned these things and seen these things and experienced these things, to me is really more
A testament.
it's a testament to the fact that it's real, that it's very real. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I remember I was in Japan and with one of these little handheld translators, and I'd just been to Kyoto to the wonderful temples there, and it was so amazing. And then I saw on the Google map, Central Zen Temple of Nara, which was the large city, and it happened to be like a little neighborhood church. And I went up to the Zen center and met the monk, and I didn't speak any Japanese, and he didn't speak any English, but I began to say, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. He went, Heiche, which is the Japanese name for Dogen.
Yes.
So, and there was such warmth there. I'll never forget it. It was the kindness and the compassion and the care that I'd actually taken the time to learn about Dogen. It was so wonderful, and I can imagine that you've had similar experiences.
Yeah,
So
I mean, in a number of ways. First of all, I love Japanese monasteries like that. I mean, I love giant cathedrals in Europe too. I mean, when I
yeah,
travel,
yeah,
but at the same time, even the big Japanese monasteries, they feel like little villages.
yeah.
There's a lot of buildings and there's monks wandering around and there's, people, tourists wandering around and even if it has a big hall, like a main hall, there's all these little other buildings and I just
Yeah.
it's very cool. And the other part that I love is that you will find that most advanced spiritual teachers, practitioners, I think are like that monk, that they're just really have a little twinkle in their eye and a smile on their face. I mean, the Dalai Lama has it. My teachers had it. Hopefully, I have it. And it because you get to this place where you just realize, yeah, everything is pretty wonderful and pretty cool, and everything is like, and you smile. There's a saying that you're the first time you experience that when you're sitting on your cushion is your soul smiles, and the first time your soul smiles, you're like, whoa, what was that? So I
The
love it.
word, the words in Chinese for resonance are ganying, and I've translated them to say to be so sincere that it almost wounds the heart, so that we can fly from a cliff together like a flock of birds.
That's
And
great.
that's that experience.
Yeah.
So, and Adam, your experience with
Oh,
with that.
there's so much. There's so much. There are two things that are coming to mind right now. Is one, when in the Confucian tradition, which deeply influenced Zen Buddhism, I just wrote an article. I submitted an article talking about how the Analects almost read like koans. This, Confucius and this student-teacher relationship. In that tradition, when we investigate things, we extend our knowledge into all things. When we extend our knowledge into all things, we realize the oneness that we have. So then we can make our thoughts sincere. And that when you were speaking it about the different sense that you get from a high level spiritual practitioner, is that they realize we're all the same, right? We all have the same oneness underneath us. And so how a sense of reverence comes through. It's like, how could you not just revere everything so deeply when you know the source that they have within them? That was one thing that came to mind. Another thing that I was coming up as you were speaking as well was when this is previously when the students would we have a lineage now in the West where we could think like people like Carl Jung, who opened up Eastern philosophy for us. So now everyone knows Zen. So after knows Zen, they say, "Oh, that's so Zen," is the thing that young people say now, right? So my third year or second year of teaching, I decided, okay, these students all have beginner mind, so I'm gonna ask them, "What is Zen?" And the answers were unbelievable. It was beautiful. I mean, they all had a sense of what Zen was from their beginner mind, and it was all so similar to flow state. When I'm out walking, when I'm playing music, this kind of thing. So I just wanted to make that connection. And yeah, I don't really necessarily have any more questions. Although I do, okay, I will be a kind of a stickler here. In the tradition, Actually, Confucian philosophy, there's no evil. There's only, for Mencius, there's no evil. There's only going your wrong way. So you have a proper way or deviation. Also, in the yin and yang theory, yin is good. There's no good and evil. It's that there's light and dark only. So yin is just the dark side of the mountain. So I wanna go back to what you were talking about in the very beginning when you were talking about you saw darkness in people, and I think I can kind of sense that, like you can see people kind of grappling with things is what I'm thinking, or maybe their anger or their fears and anxieties. But yeah, how do you synthesize the sense of the good and evil type of feeling that you had, and the sense of the darkness in people with this idea in Chinese philosophy that there's just deviation? Like even Trump or whoever, just they went the wrong way. They didn't follow their own way.
So in the Zen tradition that Peter taught, there's a very famous chant. It's a poem. Some people call it a poem that gets chanted at a lot of Zen centers every day, and it's called the Sandakai. And the Sandakai
Um,
translates as the identity of relative and absolute. And so what it means is that there's really two parts to life. There's the relative, which is what we're living in every day, which is, how we relate to the world and how the world relates to us, how we relate to other people, and it's, anger and sadness and even evil, if you want to call it evil. I'd prefer to just call it darkness, but and then there's the absolute. And the absolute is what many of us strive to be exposed to understand. And the absolute is beyond our understanding, but just to experience it is amazing. And when you experience it, it's just this pure energy of love. And there is no evil, there is no dark. It's just like this. Everything is perfect, everything is correct, everything is right, exactly the way it is. And in the Sandakai, there are a couple lines. One line is that the relative and the absolute meet like two arrow points high in the air, or the relative and the absolute fit together like a box in its lid. And so that is the ultimate goal, to synthesize these two into your understanding, into your life, that yes, there is messiness and evil and darkness, and there's also light, and that's sort of the relative. And how does that synthesize with the fact that there is no evil, there is no darkness, that everything is perfect and complete just as it is? It's really hard to do. It's hard to explain. It's you got to experience it and do the work. And it's not something most people, will ever experience. To most people, it will be a theory. But if to some people who have experienced it, it's a reality.
I think it
I
could
guess.
be available in a flow state, would you say?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say but it's even more than a flow state. It takes flow state like one step further. It
Yeah.
just and it's I wrote about it in the last chapter of my book, because the book is set up, it's sort of like a two-act play where it's like dramaturgy, like it kind of the action builds to this amazing moment in the end of the first half of the book, and that's that moment I talked about, was seeing the energy. And then it kind of goes down again, and then the action builds again to this last moment on Ocean Beach, where I was able to really see and understand this and experience it, and it's pretty amazing. I will say too, I want to say one more thing, since you guys are both very well versed in this, which I love, because not everybody that interviews me, knows a lot of these things. Um, there's another moment in the book, and this could be controversial with some Zen teachers. I will readily admit that. But the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering,
Mhm.
it, in my mind, is, well, it's not that it's taught wrong, but it's just not taught as far as it could go. So, and it's again this idea of relative and absolute. Most teachers teach about suffering like relative suffering, the suffering we experience in our everyday lives, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a job, money problems, brain injury, whatever, divorce. And that's certainly true as far as it goes. And there is a way out of that. And the way out of that is to sit and meditate and to become more mindful and happy and have your soul smile. But the Buddha was talking about something even more profound. The Buddha was talking about suffering in an absolute sense. And suffering in an absolute sense, and I've only seen it a couple times, but when you see it, and again, a switch flips in your brain, and everybody around you, even the happiest person in the world, or you think is the happiest person in the world, exhibits some suffering on their face and in their body and in their being. You see it, you're kind of like, oh my God. And the first time it happened to me, it was some people that were much serious brain practitioners than I was. And I thought to myself, they can't be suffering. Like, how can this be? But they were. And I think that Christianity, a lot of other spiritual traditions try to explain this in other ways. In Christianity, it's the idea of Adam and Eve. It's that idea of original sin. Like we have something original that just causes us to suffer. And the Buddha saw that. That was what his incredible breakthrough was, sitting under the Bodhi tree that night. He saw the truth of suffering is what he taught. And that's why the very first teaching that he gave after that happened was the truth of suffering, because he saw this absolute suffering that is the human condition. Some people call it malaise. Some people call it, I don't know, existential angst. But it's there, and we all know it deep down. We all feel it. And what the Buddha taught was there is a way out of suffering, and the way out of suffering is to sit and meditate, and you got to really work at it. I mean, he worked at it like crazy, but it is something that you can experience. So,
Well, I'm afraid we're out of time. I'm so grateful, Lee, to be able to talk with you about this. I'm Anthony Wright, and I'm your co-host today on the Living Conversation with,
Adam Dietz, thanks for doing the conversation.
and we've been talking with our guest, Lee Carlson. And how can people contact you, Lee?
so best way is my website, which is leecarlson.life, not leecarlson.com, leecarlson.life, because that's what we're talking about here. And on the website is lots of contact info, email, phone, how you can reach me on social media, all that good stuff. And right over my shoulder here, there are my two books. That's how do you do that? A Single Excellent Night is the one close to me, and Pastor Nirvana is the other one. That's the green cover. So
Great. Well, thank you so much for listening, everyone, and we will see you next time.